beware of things buried. It was an old saying my father often used when he noticed I had begun to get too curious about things that originally shouldn't concern me.
Adam!
His voice was cold as ice when he called my name. I spun around quickly at the sound of my father, the commander, who walked straight up to me, the medals that adorned his shirt bouncing lightly with each brisk step. "Sir?" My voice held no semblance of the fear that brimmed inside of me, threatening to push me off my weight, as he stopped only when he was inches away from me. Standing at a towering 6'4", the man's glowering gaze was impossible to miss. I remember thinking of how I would rather have been back home, on Earth, laughing with my mother and sisters as she made a joke about something silly. The thought vanished as soon as it came through. Commander Morrison's rough voice demanded my attention as he began speaking.
"What is this I'm hearing about you joining the 47?
The lump in my throat was harder to swallow than I thought, and for a second, I thought about how it would have been a better fate to choke on my own spit than face my father at that moment. It wasn't as though the confrontation was unexpected, but I had thought he would come much earlier. And after 2 days passed, he decided that he probably couldn't be bothered and decided to let me do whatever I wanted with my life. But boy was I wrong. I knew his anger inasmuch as he'd been nothing but a domineering disciplinarian who began to train me for the war since I knew how to hold a stick. He was still my father, and he loved me more than anything else in the cosmos. Well, there was my mother and sisters, but things between them and my father had gone sour long before my birth. When the war started, he chose to leave them to fight, cutting himself off completely for years and only returning when I was 7 to take me from them. I don't blame him. I never have. In fact, I have absolutely no feelings of animosity towards the man. The war had started out of nowhere, wiping out a quarter of the human race and taking another quarter captive. It was after the devastation that the first intergalactic military force was formed, requiring all soldiers, volunteers of free will at first, to cut off ties completely with their families and everyone they loved before joining. My father had joined without a second thought. He knew that it was the best way to be there for his family. Even though, in a literal sense, he wasn't really there for us. And then the wars raged on. The recruitment became mandatory for any male above the age of 16, but my father had come to take me at 7 because he felt that the new recruits were insolent and that raising a child up to be a warrior was the most effective war strategy. And it worked. The name Adam Morrison had bore much tales and even more titles. At first, I had been the commander's apprentice, and then I'd become the youngest soldier in the whole program. But soon after, the lone survivor in what was presumed to be a rescue mission, but turned out to be a setup. But I wasn't just a survivor. I had single-handedly taken out an entire force of aliens that came at us. Unfortunately, I hadn't been quick enough to detonate the bomb that had wiped out the rest of my team. After that, I became the most respected junior cadet in the program, and soon, I was made the commander of an elite strike force used for the most important missions. But for some reason, the mission assigned to the 47th Division had not been brought to my attention, a mission that I considered very important. The war showed no signs of coming to an end, and we were beginning to run low on resources. Even if we had reinforcements, it would only succeed in lengthening an impending doom. We needed a solution, a weapon or breakthrough of some kind, to pave a way for our victory, and for the longest time, we've had no hope of anything like that. Until 2 days ago.
"I'm speaking to you, Corporal!"
My father's voice came as a thunderous jolt, snapping me away from my thoughts. Sir, the 47th Division have stumbled on something extraordinary. A mothership buried 20 miles east of the ruins of Thronas.
Yes, so I've heard.
The apathy in his voice was abashing, making me lean back a bit to look at him. The lingering fear in my eyes replaced with seething rage. You knew? Why wasn't my team made aware of it then?
I don't think I have to remind you that I'm your commander, and as such, I determine what missions should be brought to your notice.
Yes, but this is a very dangerous and important mission, Father. There are chances that we would be able to find secrets or weapons or anything that could aid us in this war, and you'd rather I just sit back and watch? Thronas is not a safe place. The 47th Division is no match for the monstrosities residing on that planet.
And you think you and your team are?
His voice was harsh and terrible, cutting through mine sharply, but within all that bravado, I could still sense the paternal concern that laced his harsh voice and cold gaze. Father, this is a chance. We have not had one like this since the beginning of this war, and I know you're trying to look out for me, but I would never be able to forgive myself if this mission goes wrong. And neither would you. His gaze melted, his heavy huffs becoming shaky as his eyes held mine, and for once, in what felt like a lifetime, I could see the pride and love in my father's eyes.
Maybe I should have listened to your mother and let you hide with the other boys at the pier that night.
Maybe you should have, but at least you didn't rat out the rest of the families trying to hide their sons. You're a good man, Dad.
And you're the very best of men, son.
I smiled. It was not the first time that he told me those words. No, it wasn't even the 10th. But this time around, he wasn't drilling it into my head with a stark gaze and rigid smile. This time, he was acknowledging me, the very best of men.
All right, well, now go. And make sure you return safely with those men. They're counting on you, Corporal.
My heart thrummed with pride and fear as I nodded. Yes, Commander. Lifting my hand to my head as I stomped my feet on the ground and stood in a rigid pose. I saluted him. He nodded at me, a smug grin on his face as he turned around and headed back the way he came. I took a deep breath, the kind that you could literally feel sliding down your throat and swelling up in your chest. And I turned the other way and kept walking. Search and rescue? My voice was filled with astonishment as I stood in front of a brown-eyed man with a hard face and eyes that seemed to hold nothing. He was the captain of the 47th, Ivan Romano. He was a short man with thick dark hair that seemed to blend with his ashen beard. His height, emotionlessness, and accuracy with the butcher's knife that was always strapped to the side of his left boot earned him a well-known nickname: the Spanish Butcher. Had I known that I and my team would be put on patrol duty, I most definitely wouldn't have gone against my father's directives and led us so far. But at the same time, it made sense. Thronas was a desolate planet filled with the most ugly creatures lurking in the shadows that enveloped the entire planet permanently. And with the ship so close to it, nobody knew for sure what could have stumbled into it. There was no saying what the 47th would find, and if we all walked in blindly, we would end up wasting our time and our lives as well. The plan was to stay with him, remaining in correspondence with the rest of the team until we were needed. The shuttlecraft of each soldier on the 47th left a few months after we had arrived on the ship, their course set for the entrance of the mothership. They had managed to get through the scattered rubble that spilled out from Thronas, and were heading towards the ship, their body cams providing us with blurry and hazy visuals which played on the screens scattered across the room where we sat. I paid rapt attention to the screen in front of me. my eyes darting from one screen to the other as I tried to piece together the details of the planet. The ship came into view. A complete half of it was completely submerged into what looked like a dark and shadowy gap in the galaxy, and the other half that hadn't sunk into the void looked wider than the ship we were currently on.
"We found an entrance,"
one of the soldiers reported, his static voice breaking through the recorders and stealing our attention. I leaned closer on my seat as I watched them all troop into a dark entrance hallway. The metallic door had been busted and left on the ground. Some soldiers ran to both sides of the door, pulling out their rifles and turning on the torchlight setting before peering into the room and flashing their lights around.
"It's empty."
It really was, and I felt my heart begin to sink at the sight in front of me. The ship was a barrage of shards, splinters, and debris hanging off different corners of the room, the air thick with dust and a weird-looking pollen. Wires hung from the ceiling in different outlets, but they didn't look as though there was current passing through them.
"We're moving in."
I followed their movements, and with every room and office they passed, my hope of us finding the answer to our problem, the end to the war, diminished slightly.
"Is that everything?"
Ivan's strained voice called out. He was leaning on the desk now, his eyes dangerously close to the screen as his eyes darted around. I could also sense his wavering hope, as well as that of the people all around me and those on the screen. They had searched through the entire ship and found nothing but rubble.
"Sir, I found something."
Everyone's eyes returned to the screen once more, glimmering with anticipation as we searched for which soldier had spoken. He spoke again.
"It looks like a lab of some sort. My panel is detecting a string pulse of energy coming from there. It's an insane amount. It's almost enough to power 3 battleships."
Ivan turned back to look at me, his eyes holding the same message that mine did. We found it. He turned back to the screen and placed his lips close to the mic, tapping a button as he began to speak.
"All right. Wait there for the rest of your team. Move as a single unit. We don't know what could be in there."
We watched as the other members of the team, who had split up earlier to cover more ground, began to move towards the lab.
"What is that?"
The question was in all of our heads, but it had only managed to leave the lips of one of the IT guys who sat in front of the surveillance screens. We were looking at an orbit, I think. Light hues of purple and white danced in an electrical hum. Right in the middle was a micro black hole that seemed to travel into the depths of darkness itself. It was an eerie-looking thing, and if I was a child, I would have most definitely thought that it was a portal? Captain Ivan's voice was firm, like he had just stated a fact. I shared glances with the rest of my team, our faces filled with shock. We were usually sent on missions that involved interception of spy networks or combat with encroaching forces, so there was still a lot about the alien world that most of us didn't know. The 47th Division, on the other hand, this was their territory. My ass had already begun to hurt, so I was more than eager to hop off my chair.
"So, you're telling me that what I'm looking at right now is an actual portal? Like, that ship right there leads to another dimension or something?" "Precisely."
Ivan's eyes were still on the screen as he spoke. He tapped the button on the mic once more.
"Prepare to breach."
I wanted to say something, but then I reminded myself that they were used to things like this, which meant they were properly equipped to breach the portal.
"What about radio or video interference?"
"Our technology has been upgraded to detect interdimensional frequencies, bypassing all forms of interference. You'll see."
With folded arms, I watched them all walk through the portal, one after the other. And just like Ivan had promised, there was no interference at all. Passing through the portal was not as complex as I had imagined. They weren't warped into a wormhole that spun them around and around through a vertigo of colors. It was actually just like walking through a passage, only this time it was to another dimension. One which was even more disastrous than the last. They seemed to still be on the ship, but a more twisted version of it, with guttural, croaking sounds echoing through the hallways and blood painting the floors and walls. I'm not sure about this, Captain. Perhaps they can be on standby while I and my team join them.
There is no time. Our anatomy is not welcome in the world which they've just stepped in. And the only reason they aren't gouging their eyes out is because of the suit they have on. It stores oxygen from our world, but I'm afraid it wouldn't last very long.
A dreadful feeling, intense and visceral, swept through me as I watched the team navigate through the eerie hallways. My eyes darted to the heat sensors at the top right of the screen. There was a sudden spike. Something is in there with them. Screams came through the speakers, blood-curdling shrieks of terror that sent shivers down my spine. My heart raced as I watched the heat signatures multiply on the monitor. Something was in there with them, and it wasn't friendly. Get your gear on now, we're going in. I barked at my squad mates. They snapped into action without hesitation, pulling on armored enviro suits and checking weapons. Within minutes, we were outfitted and ready to breach the portal. I took one last look at the nightmarish scene unfolding on the video feed. We better leave now. My teammates nodded as we all moved to the back of the ship, where engineers were running frantically and waiting to strap us into shuttles. The narrow corridors of the alien ship were slick with gore, the walls seeming to pulse with organic growths. Worst of all were the creatures, tall, gangly horrors with a slimy pink flesh, multiple eyes blinking independently, and steel-coated claws dripping with goo. As I watched in revulsion, one of the beasts unhinged its jaw impossibly wide and vomited forth a torrent of purple acidic saliva onto a fallen soldier. Stealing my nerves, I signaled to my team and we strode through the shimmering portal. The transition was jarring. One moment the cold steel interior of the mothership, the next, a scene of utter alien grotesquerie. The stench was overpowering, a miasma of decaying flesh and industrial chemicals assaulting my nostrils even with my oxygen mask on. Brackish fluids sloshed around our boots as we fanned out, weapons raised. Corporal Morrison, over here! It was Jennings, one of the 47th's techs, cowering behind an overgrown control panel. I rushed over, boots squishing in the filth, and was relieved to find two other survivors huddled with him, Ramirez and Yusuf from my own team. The rest, I tried not to look at the mangled remains littering the floor. What in the blazing hell are these things? Ramirez gasped, gripping her plasma rifle tightly. Before I could respond, a chorus of piercing shrieks split the air. From the darkness ahead, a wave of those grotesque, pink monstrosities surged forward on spindly legs, claws extended to rend and tear. They moved with a nauseating fluidity, seemingly boneless. Open fire! I commanded, raking the leading beasts with automatic fire from my railgun. High-velocity tungsten slugs punched into their foul flesh, blasting off limbs and pulping organs in showers of ichor. Yet, for every one that fell, 3 more skittered forward, undeterred. The things were relentless, shrugging off injuries that would drop any human or conventional alien. Backing away from the unstoppable tide, we fell into a ragged firing line, weapons scorching the air with plasma and metal fury.
The beasts kept coming, slashing and biting with those hideous vertical maws. One dragged away a shrieking Yusuf, his legs torn off at the knees in a welter of blood. Another punched on Jennings, ripping through his suit and spilling his entrails across the deck before we could even scream. I fought with the cold precision of a machine, analyzing every angle, picking my shots with lethal focus. These things had tenacity, but they were small-brain brutes. I recalled the captain's words. Some sort of interdimensional portal. An alien realm incompatible with our own physical existence. Perhaps these horrors were simply the pure distillation of death and decay from that blighted universe. Either way, the only path forward was through them. Coordinating Ramirez's firepower, I began executing precise attack runs, leaping from cover to cover, while she lay down, suppressing fire from her plasma caster. Slowly but surely, we carved a path through the seething mass toward the energy nexus powering the portal. If we could overload that, maybe we could seal this gateway to oblivion forever. An eternity seemed to pass in those hellish minutes of combat. Again and again, the beasts rushed us, slashing and biting with their horrible claws and mandibles. I took a vicious slash to my forearm, suit breached, flesh laid open to those nightmare dimensions. For a dizzy moment, I imagined I could see strange colors seeping into my very cells, rewriting my DNA into new horrific patterns. At last, we reached the nexus, a pulsating orb of violet energies, tendrils arcing across its surface. Warning lights flashed ominously on the control panels. "Cover me!" I shouted to Ramirez as I slapped open an access hatch. She nodded grimly, swinging her rifle toward the oncoming horde as I pulled a compact demolition charge from my pack. With a few deft motions, I armed the charge and pressed it into the throbbing innards of the Nexus. "Fire in the hole!" I hollered, and we both flung ourselves away as the charge detonated in a blinding fury of exotic particles. The shockwave slammed us from our feet, and when I could see again, the portal had winked out of existence. No more shrieking horrors would pour through that abyss. Yet our relief was short-lived, as the entire dimension seemed to shudder around us in the wake of the Nexus's destruction. Growths withered, walls flowed like melting wax, the very air grew thick and viscous. We were well and truly stranded in a collapsing reality. "This way!" I grabbed Ramirez by the arm, and we stumbled through knee-deep floods of organic sludge. Every breath felt like drowning. Up ahead, the featureless oval of the exit portal flickered in and out of existence, our only hope of escape. We half fell, half swam through the rupturing rift, flailing in that realm's dying spasms. Just before the portal winked out, I managed to shove the priceless energy orb through to the other side. At least someone would make it out with that cosmic prize. Then, the portal snapped shut, leaving me adrift in a rapidly decaying universe. The last thing I saw was Ramirez's horrified eyes, still in our own plane of reality, as her world was severed from mine forever. Then, only rolling, formless geometries in shade of sickening spectral hues. As reality frayed around me like an unraveling tapestry, I could feel my own being commencing a deeper unraveling. My atoms, shedding their cohesion, started to part ways after a lifetime bound together as the flesh and soul of Adam Morrison. Is this how the universe ends? I wondered. Not in fire or ice, but in a great unmaking, all structures dismantled, all patterns erased. My last thoughts were of my father, my mentor and comrade through countless battles. Would he weep for me or simply harden his heart as he had long ago? Perhaps one day, he would come to accept and understand the sacrifice I had made to shut this Pandora's box once and for all, no matter the personal cost. I am, after all, the very best of men. Thanks everyone for watching this new sci-fi horror story about the trauma and sacrifice of Corporal Adam Morrison. If you'd like to support the channel, and I really hope you do, please like this video, subscribe to the channel if you like what we're doing more broadly, and if you'd like access to see what all content is coming up, then make sure to hit the notification bell. If you'd like to send in your own video for me to narrate, please send it to the email in the video description of this video and all videos on the channel. But please let me know how you'd like to be credited, and if we can keep them short stories, kind of around max 2,500 words, that would be much appreciated. If you'd like to chat further, you'll catch me in the comments. I'll be there, and I try to respond to every comment that I can. Remember, as well as sending in your own stories, you can petition me to actually create stories of my own, but in a style that you like. So if it's a certain type of sci-fi horror, etc., if it's like that classic 90s kind of aliens vibe or something else, then please let me know in the comments as well. Be much appreciated, and that will give me definitely some more ideas. So I think that kind of sums it up. Thanks so much, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.